Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our second annual virtual summit. I'm really excited today to have this panel discussion about the path forward. So I'm going to go through a few slides really quick first and just kind of give some background on the path forward. And then I'll introduce you to our great panel of people that have more knowledge than I do on this. So here we go. The path forward claims to be a 2019 coalition-backed proposal supported by HSUS, the ASPCA, Return to Freedom, American Farm Bureau, Society for Range Management, Public Lands Council, National Horse and Burro Rangeland Management Coalition, Eureka County, Nevada County Commission Office, Humane Society of the United States, National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Beaver County, Utah County Commission Office, the American Mustang Foundation, the Utah Governor's Office. The group states that the goal of the path forward is to manage the U.S. Bureau of Land Management wild horse populations through non-lethal methods. So from the document submitted to Congress requesting an increase to the BLM budget to support the path forward, we propose a solution that will eventually release the BLM from the costly cycle of roundups and holdings, while reducing the number of horses and burros on the range and making progress toward the agency determined appropriate management levels, AMLs. So what the path forward solutions they offered were to conduct targeted gathers and removals at densely populated HMAs to reduce herd size and make progress towards AMLs, treat gathered horses and burros with population growth suppression tools prior to being returned to the range. Reversible methods must be administered to an appropriate percentage of mares, generally close to 90% to control populations, with some flexibility depending on modeling of range and herd parameters. Relocate horses and burros in holding facilities and those taken off range to large, cost-effective humane pasture facilities funded through public-private partnerships, and to promote adoptions in order to help reduce captive populations and costs. The BLM is currently spending $2,250 or $3,250 with the incentive program that they had per adopted horse to promote adoptions that ultimately provide considerable cost savings to the agency. Investing in an adoption process for each horse will reduce or eliminate the estimated $46,000 per horse expenditure in off-range holding over the course of their lifetime. So those were the solutions that this panel of so-called experts proposed. So the path forward gave the BLM a goal that they were now working toward. So on all public lands throughout the US, a total of 22,637 wild horses and 2,919 wild burros. The BLM budget has also increased from 101 million in 2019 to 144 million for fiscal year 2026. According to the BLM's numbers from March of 2025, there were 53,797 wild horses and 19,333 wild burros on over 2 million acres of public lands. So, and again, these lands belong to us. So I'm going to go to our panel discussion now, and I want to introduce you to Ginger, Mary, and Charlotte, and I'm going to ask them to just introduce themselves really quickly, and then we will go through some questions that we have for them. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be happy to have a discussion about all this after we're done with our panel discussion. So Mary, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. First, thanks everybody for coming to this webinar. And of course, thanks for Chris for hosting it. I've been involved with wild horses and burros probably about 15 years. I was a staff member with American Wild Horse Campaign up until a few years ago, but I've also been an adjunct instructor with the Tufts Vet School Center for Animals and Public Policy. And I've done numerous research projects on wild horse adoption.
Ginger, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ginger Fedak. I have been a horse person my entire life. I started just back when I was a kid and worked my way up as a domestic riding instructor.
Mm.
And I, as a kid, of course, I read about wild horses, but I never understood the problem. I read Marguerite Henry's books, and she had a Mustang chapter in her Album of Horses book, and that was basically the knowledge I had. I never really knew anything about the problems that wild horses had until I went to Carol Walker's very first seminar that she did, uh, her presentation showing her photographs and what she found in the wild horse herds in Wyoming. It was the very first presentation she did at the Boulder Public Library. It was over 20 years ago. And after that, I adopted my first Mustang and just became studying the issue more and more and more. And for 5.5 years until a couple of years ago, I was the Wild Horse and Burro campaign director at In Defense of Animals.
All right. And Charlotte, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. I am somebody who's been immersed in wild horse and burro issues for about 12 years. I'm an adopter, I like to call it guardian of wild burros, formerly wild burros, and two formerly wild Mustangs. I'm the volunteer science advisor for the Cloud Foundation, and I work really closely with several other groups, including Wild Horse Education, the Long Hopes Donkey Shelter. When I started, I formed a group called the Wild Equid League of Colorado whose main purpose was to try to knit together groups that often work at odds or don't know what each other are doing. And I'm really glad to be here.
Well, thank you. And I just want to say these three women I find them very incredible advocates for our wild horses and burros. Um, I've been friends with these ladies for anywhere from 4 to, I think, Mary, we've been friends for 6 or 7 years now already. I've learned a ton from them, and I'm really hoping that you guys can learn a lot too. So I'm going to go through just a couple questions that we have just kind of to spark a conversation. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So Ginger, I'm going to start with you. And how can you tell us how the path forward came about?
Okay, let's try and condense this very long history. Of course, for many years, cattle associations have had their local meetings and their national meetings, and they always talked about this wild horse and burro problem. And they've been doing that for decades. But then in 2011, they started getting a little more serious about how they could get their wishes to Congress. And so they started having some meetings, which culminated. And it started with this. I don't know if you can see it. It's called 10 Years to AML. And if you look at who's sponsored on there, it's Return to Freedom, HSUS, ASPCA, and the Mustang Foundation, who we're going to be talking about that are involved heavily in the path forward. And when this 10 Years to AML came out, then some of the movers and shakers in the advocacy world started talking to people like, here's a letter from Susanna Roy to Jillian Lyons of HSUS and Nancy Perry of ASPCA. And she wrote to them and told them what the problems were in the 10 years to AML and didn't get any kind of resolution from them. They just stuck with it. But whoops, what happened? There. Okay. And so what happened was it all culminated after 10 years to AML. It culminated in a meeting that these Cattlemen Association people and livestock, all the anti-wild horse people, decided to hold what they called a wild horse summit. And they held it in Salt Lake City in 2017. And it kind of evolved from the 10 years to AML, but it was even worse. Um, the uh, when the wild horse advocacy organizations tried to register for this wild horse summit, like Cloud Foundation and AWHC, some of the bigger organizations and smaller individuals, when they tried to register for this summit, they were shut out. They were not allowed to join. So right there was the red flag. We knew what was going on. There were no wild horse and burro scientists or fertility. There were no real scientists at this meeting, no rangeland specialists who understood the or would acknowledge the cattle and livestock problems. The general public was not allowed, and their primary goal was sales without limitation. And we all know that means send them to slaughter, sell them to slaughter. And their other primary goal was killing healthy horses on the range. So what happened from that is advocates started calling it the Slaughter Summit. And if you want to find out a lot more information about the Slaughter Summit, you can just Google it and you'll be surprised how much information comes up about this 2017 Slaughter Summit and how horrible it was. But when the wild horse advocates and organizations got shut out of this meeting, they decided to go anyway, and they reserved a room in the hotel where it was being held so they could hold a media conference. And lo and behold, at the last minute, their room reservation for the meeting was canceled. They were told they couldn't do it. I wonder how that happened. And so what did they do? They went outside and stood on the steps of the building, and they held up their protest signs. They invited media, and there is a picture of that somewhere in this program of Charlotte was there. Ginger Catherines of Cloud Foundation was there. Suzanne Roy of AWHC was there. Simone Neverlands of the Salt River Group was there. A lot of movers and shakers in the advocacy world were there to say this is wrong. But from this Slaughter Summit evolved the path forward. Why did that happen? Because in the Slaughter Summit, I think they did it deliberately to get these SUS and ASPCA and RTF on board. They deliberately talked about killing healthy horses on the range, selling horses in holding to slaughter, and they were even advocating eating horse meat. So these shocking allegations created a scenario where the Humane Society and the ASPCA, who really knew nothing about wild horse management and wild horse behavior and anything like that, they got involved. They said, "Oh, we can't have these lethal recommendations. We've got to find another way." So out of that came the path forward. They decided they were going to collaborate with these cattlemen associations and the BLM. And all of us threw up our red flags. We said, you cannot trust the BLM, because when you read through the path forward plan, some of it seems very reasonable, except of course for removing 15 to 20,000 horses a year. That's not very reasonable, but a lot of it seems very reasonable. But what we understood that we felt that they didn't, especially ASPCA and HSUS, they didn't understand the BLM and their methods of getting around things. And I'm going to talk about that too. Another thing to remember is a big proponent who pushed the path forward was U.S. Representative from Utah, Chris Stewart. He was very involved with this. He even put an amendment in the U.S. House that called for ending the limitations on horse selling to slaughter and that. It passed in the House because of Chris Stewart, but it never got through the Senate, thankfully. But the major provisions of the path forward, you did kind of see on the slide, but the three major provisions were the removals. And did that happen? Yes. Everything in the path forward that's bad happened. Everything in the path forward that's good didn't happen. So removals happened, yes. Many, many more removals than had previously been done. The other major provision in the path forward was fertility control. Uh, did that happen? Well, some places say yes, we got 11% in the US budget for fertility control. But the wording was so vague that the BLM used that to say, oh, we're going to do sterilizations. And they started all these ovarectomy via colpotomy sterilizations of mares where they're ripping their insides out and many died. So we had many campaigns to stop that against the universities, and that did get stopped. But there's still all this vague language that the BLM can use that 11% funding to do whatever they want with. And very little of it goes to PZP. And also, in the path forward, they call PZP, they say that they require reversible fertility control. And as we know, Gonacon is very rarely reversible. It can be in very few cases, but when it's administered, especially not according to the scientific documents that have been shown, it has made the mares permanently infertile. We don't say sterilized because that's typically surgical. But the other major provision in the path forward was they were going to have these wonderful off-range pastures. Instead of keeping the horses in holding, they were going to go to private places where they had these wonderful, big, huge range-like condition pastures. That never happened either. They currently have off-range pastures for long-term holding, but still many, many, many thousands of captured wild horses still remain in the short-term disgusting holding pens. And those that do go to long-range pastures, what do we know about them? Absolutely zero, because there is no transparency, there is no public visitation, there is no the BLM says that they can go and inspect anytime. Do you think they do? These places could actually say, yeah, I'm getting paid for my 10,000 horses or my 2,000 horses. And who knows, are they even there? Nothing is transparent. So now I can go over specifically those three major things, but this is the actual path forward document. And it shows all the people on it that we were talking about who are sponsors of it. And one of the sponsors, the American Mustang Foundation, they started that group right at the 10 years to AML part where they could be a major participant and be considered wild horse experts. But are they? No, they're livestock people. So going through the document, I don't want to take too much time, but again, when you read it, a lot of it sounds good. One of the main problems is they acknowledge that getting to AML is what they're trying to do. And we all know that AML is not scientifically proven. The National Academy of Sciences talked about that. The document does admit that the current Roundup way of BLM's doing things, they admit it doesn't work. The compensatory reproduction that the NAS study talks about is a real thing. When they remove horses, it's like taking a cup of water out of a pail. The other water fills it in. When they remove horses from a range, the compensatory reproduction amps up and more horses take their place. It's a non-sustainable method, and it's amazing that it has been allowed to go on this long. So in the path forward, it says, failure to effectively implement any part of this program jeopardizes the success of the program. And if employed correctly, then it will work. Well, as we know already, very little of it has been implemented, and of course, it's not going to be successful. One of the main problems of the path forward is it never, ever, like everything else the BLM does, acknowledges the damage livestock does to the range, because livestock so overpopulate the range more than the horses. And horses are native, and cattle and sheep are native to a whole nother continent. So yeah, there's a lot of things in the path forward that are problematic. It actually says it wants to maintain the status quo for livestock grazing, which is a big problem. They endorse removals from area where the range has been deteriorating. And if you watched Eric Molvar's presentation, you see that where the range is deteriorating is where the cattle are, not where the horses are. Also, the path forward talks about utilizing this plan in areas mostly where there's either rangeland degeneration or direct political conflict. And direct political conflict means that the places like the Rock Springs Cattle Association, who are fighting for the checkerboard areas, HMAs, and people like the name is escaping me right now, but like when they had the Mary help me, who was the guy in Oregon that had the standoff with BLM?
Bundy Brothers.
Bundy, yeah.
Bundy, yeah. And
Yeah. So
that was in Nevada.
yeah. Well, and he had one in Oregon too.
Yeah, that was the cousin, I think, of Bundy. I can't remember his name. Yeah, and it was the Marhar Forest Service. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, that's what they consider political conflict. So they're going to leave these guys, these lawbreakers, alone. There's just, and then the path forward also has a very good clause in it. It says all removals must be conducted in strict compliance with the Comprehensive Animal Welfare Program. That's called COP. And we have seen so many infractions over the past many decades. Every time there's a roundup, horses are dying and being run into fence, run into barbed wire. Foals are left on the range to die. So many COP infractions. It's amazing. And then, of course, the whole fertility control concept they have in the path forward has been totally messed up by BLM. And it also even talks about permanent sterilization of the herds. And then they talk about research for better methods than PCP that are longer lasting, and that's where GonaCon came in, and Chris is so involved with that in the North Dakota horses. So we know that GonaCon is not the best way. PCP is reversible, and it is being used correctly in a lot of areas, but that's too difficult for BLM. They don't want to do it, even though there's many advocacy organizations and boots on the ground advocates who would do it voluntarily. So that's the path forward and some of the problems in a nutshell.
Thank you, Ginger.
Some stuff.
I want to let everybody know that I will have some links, a resource page with some links so people can explore this further if you want, and actually the actual path forward document, so you can look at that. But Charlotte, can you tell us what was the role in influencing wild horse and burro policy, and what role did the animal welfare groups play by participating?
Well, I think we only have a half an hour left, and even for the discussion. So I'm going to be really
we have
quick.
more time, so we've got plenty of time. So
the role of the quote, animal welfare groups in supporting, and actually they drafted the path forward, is they gave the BLM cover. They give cover to the livestock industry that wants to get rid of the horses. And they appeared as experts on, wild horses and burros, which they know, as Ginger said, they know nothing about. So I want to talk a little bit about what that means for today. And what it means for today is that the path forward, under whatever name, you're not going to hear the path forward. What you're going to hear is the original title of the draft that Humane Society, ASPCA, Return to Freedom put forward, which is 10 years to AML. 10 years to AML is now the budget language. It is what the BLM has come forward every year since 2019, proposing. It was adopted into the 2020 budget for the Department of Interior and the BLM's Wild Horse and Burro program. So in every subsequent year, it has been the core of the report language for the Appropriations Subcommittee for Interior, making it de facto law. And what it gives is the BLM has permission for an, quote, aggressively non-lethal population control strategy that aligns with the goal of 10 years to AML, and specifically wants to reduce wild horse and burro populations to actually less than they were at the time when the Wild Horse Act was adopted in 1971, when President Richard Nixon said, we have to do this because they are fast disappearing from the West. So this was the betrayal, and this is what we're dealing with now. It's budget language. It gets passed every year. And every year you do hear cries of, well, we got a victory because we have the 11 million for fertility control. As Ginger explained, fertility control is a huge banner that BLM uses to do everything from sex skewing, which is part of the path forward, making the population of stallions way more than mares, causing total disruption to herd dynamics, hurting natural behavior, and putting mares and foals and yearlings in great jeopardy. So that's just one part of it. But that's what we're dealing with now. So what you have is a huge lobbying package and something that's now embedded in the budget that guides BLM. So not a good thing.
I would
And we
like
al-
to I would like to add that the sex skewing that Charlotte said that's in the path forward, it says they want at least 70% stallions to 30% mares. And as she said, this just creates chaos on the range. But what I would like to say about that is every management plan for each herd that comes out of the BLM includes the sex skewing, and we have to fight it every single time and are very often ignored.
I just want to
Yeah,
say something, if I can, for clarification, that because HSUS, the ASPCA, Return to Freedom, and the American Mustang Foundation, because they were signed on to this, it's wrongfully believed by anybody who looks at this that wild horse and burro advocates support this then,
Mhm.
correct? So
Yes.
I just
Yeah.
want to put that out there so people.
Yeah.
And Congress thinks, because HSUS and ASPCA are on there, they're the experts, they know best. Congress is clueless about that.
Yeah. And just following up on that, in addition to either developing or supporting some pretty questionable solutions, when HSUS and ASPCA and Return to Freedom agreed to be part of this, I think one of the legacies is that the Path Forward created a very successful and long enduring piece of propaganda, not only for the BLM Congress and Penley, but any other groups that want to eliminate wild horses and burros. Essentially, I think they gave legitimacy to this type of management. And even as I think Ginger and Charlotte mentioned, ASPCA and not so much HSUS, they really don't have feet on the ground when it comes to wild horse and burro management. And now, for example, if you look at Pentley's comments in the I got to get these right, Project 2025. He doesn't have to mention the path forward. All he has to do is mention ASPCA and HSUS. And I think his quote is, I want to get this right, animal organizations such as Animal Society for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and the Humane Society of the United States recognize that the propensity of wild horses on burros on public land is threatened if herds continue to grow unabashed. So, I mean, he's really using this endorsement by these groups to really push and legitimize, these, like I said, very questionable and dangerous policies.
Right. Well, thank you, ladies. Mary, can you talk about what advocates did to oppose this?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the unified statement, and I think Charlotte and Ginger can follow up. The unified statement was a response to the recent attacks on wild horses and burros using science, facts, and humane solutions. It was released on February 13th, 2018. Actually, it was released twice.
Yes.
It was later released in April. But in February, it was a day after the Trump administration issued its fiscal year 2019 budget, which once again called on Congress to lift the ban on killing and slaughtering Mustangs and burros. Important to point out was that this project was a collaboration between American Wild Horse Campaign and the Cloud Foundation that eventually gathered, I think it was, Charlotte, 110 signatures from a very vast range of stakeholders. They included other wild horse and burro groups, trainers, ranchers, wild horse and burro photographers, ecotourism groups, equine rescues and sanctuaries, and humane societies. I'm just looking at my notes, so bear with me. Charlotte and I, that was a very fun time. We drafted a lot of it and then made tons of phone calls and sent tons of emails asking these different stakeholders if they would add their names to it. And for the most part, if I remember correctly, Charlotte, we had a pretty positive response. So that was very, very encouraging. The main gist of the unified statement was to urge Congress to maintain long-lasting federal protection for wild horses and burros. And it also set forth both principles and recommendations for effective range management of wild horses on burros that were intended to guide Congress toward a long-term plan that was safe and humane for herds, as well as sustainable and cost-effective for taxpayers. We had 10 principles, and they were consistent with the findings from the 2013 NAS report on the BLM wild horse and burro program. And we also used peer-reviewed research in fields like veterinarian medicine, wild equid behavior, biology, ecology, and so forth. Some of the principles were the killing, destruction, and sale for slaughter of wild horses and burros must remain prohibited. Another one, wild horses and burros must be managed in genetically viable free-roaming herds. Third was wild horses are native wildlife. Fourth was range health must be assessed holistically. Wild horses and burros must not be scapegoated. And the fifth one, like I said, these are just some of them out of the 10 principles. The management of wild horses and burros on public ranch land must be guided by the best current science and data, and also must consider input from the American public. We also included, I think there were 11 or 12 recommendations, and they were, for example, developing a 10-year fertility control program to reduce and stabilize wild horse populations as needed. We also wanted or recommended that wild equines be returned to public lands from the expensive short-term holding facilities. We asked or recommended a prohibition on sterilization of horses and burros. We wanted to establish equitable forage, and this is really important, equitable forage allocations, and also compensate ranchers for reduced use or non-use of grazing permits on wild horse and burro habitat. Important too was protecting predators on HMAs and HAs and also wild horse territories. The unified statement also included references which were absent from the path forward. And needless to say, HSUS, ASPCA, nor Return to Freedom signed it. So, I think that what we used the unified statement for was it was presented to key House and Senate appropriators and other members of Congress. And it was also, I think, it got a good degree of publicity. And I know other groups would include it when they were reaching out to members of Congress or whoever. But in April 2018, it was an especially powerful retort to the BLM's plan to reduce herds to AML and basically extinction level population. That was calling for, and I think Ginger touched on that, removing 550,000 wild horses and burros, mass killings, and sterilizations. And I think what was so important about this document in collaboration was the sheer number of groups that rallied behind it and agreed and came together to say, we have a better solution. We can do better than what the path forward is proposing. So
I think Ginger, did you have something to add? I think the BLM
well,
was
the unified statement was a huge project, and Mary and Charlotte did a huge amount of drafting work, and others of us did some research work and smaller input, but they did just an amazing job. But unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the story, because it was sent out to BLM, it was sent out to Congress and appropriations, and people would individually send it to their representatives. And that got BLM's attention. This giant mass unification of all of us coming together and doing something got BLM's attention. And so their follow-up report to Congress just was so full of lies and misinformation that they tried to counteract what we were saying in the unified statement. So we couldn't sit still and listen to that. So we produced this document. And I think that Chris is going to supply the links to all of these documents. But this document is called a Unified Response to the Misinformation in BLM's report to Congress, called Wild Horse and Burro Management Plan. And this was in May of 2018. And you can see the major sponsors of that one are on there. But I'm just quickly going to say the lies that we called out, and then you can grab the document to see the what we have to support what we're calling lies. First of all, the plan was completely focused on achieving AML. which has been deemed unscientific and arbitrary. Number two, the BLM's management plan is full of inconsistencies. As we read through it, there were just inconsistencies everywhere. Number three, it incorrectly cites a number of wild horse and burro management associated costs. They way blew up the costs of fertility control, and they skewed everything they could, and a lot of it was simply outright lies. Number four, they talked about the widespread starving of wild horses and burros on our public lands. And those of us who have been going to BLM advisory board meetings for years have seen the same sad picture every single year of a bony wild horse who looks starving. And does that ever happen? Yes, it can happen every once in a while. But somewhere I found, and I wish I could find where I put the original, I found the picture of that isolated horse with the whole herd behind her, and they were all fat.
Interesting, Ginger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then number five, the management plan inaccurately states that wild horses and burros have no natural predators. We talked about that and gave specific examples. Number six, there is no data that shows wild horses are having a significant impact to rangeland apart from livestock, because they never mention the livestock. And if you listen, Eric Mulvar is the best on that subject. He has all the data that shows that the livestock, cattle and sheep, are doing the damage and not the horses. And there's a graph in here. You won't be able to see it because the colors are too light. But here's the cattle and sheep population up here, and here's the wild horse population down here in a line. Number seven, the BLM grossly mischaracterized management proposal compiled by external organizations. That's the path forward, and that's what Mary was just talking about. Number eight, BLM is misleading about their work with external organizations. They pick and choose what they want and make people assume other. Number nine, the BLM's claim that permanent sterilization would be more effective in addressing population growth and available birth control vaccines is patently false, and it's also very dangerous. So those are the points that were put, and again, completely scientifically referenced. Every point we made had a scientific or other document to support our thing. But does BLM care about science? It depends. I mean, we can look at some of the scientists in the department now, and they're not scientists.
I think it just goes to, I think we've always said also, when it comes to us proving our point, we always have to have the best science to back it up. But these federal agencies don't seem to be held to the same standards that we all are. So
exactly. And another thing is that we haven't really mentioned is, well, we can mention it when we're talking about what to do, but the anti-wild horse organizations and cattlemen's and livestock organizations, they have deep pockets. The money talks. When I've been up on Capitol Hill in Congress, going from office to office, trying to talk about these issues, I've been up there with other advocates. And one that we had planned in advance and publicized, guess who showed up the same time? Public Lands Council. They were everywhere walking through the halls. They were met with open arms where we had to fight our way in. They were allowed to give presentations and luncheons and things like that, where when we offered, nope, sorry, no time.
all right. Charlotte, do you want to talk about what it means now, and how did the path forward, how does it intersect with Project 2025's Chapter 16 on wild horses and burros?
Well, I did talk about what it means now because it's now part of the budget language. That is the subcommittee on Interior puts out committee reports, and that becomes, in effect, the basis for budget appropriations and the permission slip for the BLM to enact the program we're talking about, 10 years to AML. So how this intersects with Project 2025, well, you have to go back a little bit. Chris Stewart, and especially William Perry Pendley, who was under Trump's first administration, the acting head of BLM, is a big associate of what's called the Sagebrush Rebellion. And we're talking about, this goes back decades, but the most dramatic instance of it was when the Bundy brothers took over a wildlife reserve, put their cattle out and said, we're not moving them, and had armed confrontations with the federal agency land managers that tried to get them out. Pendley is a big supporter of that, and he wrote Chapter 16 of Project 2025. But you have to, and I think some of that language has been cited. The bottom line is wild horses and burros are very destructive. They're way overpopulating. They're hurting the range. It's costing too much. It's exorbitantly costing. And the only solution is to humanely dispose of them, meaning send them to slaughter. That is really Project 2025's proposal is really the upshot of the path forward. Why? Because what the path forward has done since it became part of appropriations is hugely accelerate the roundups, 15 to 20,000 a year, pack them into warehousing that is unable to hold them or unable. So that eats up, as Project 2025 was sure to mention, most of the BLM's budget. We're talking about 100 million per year cost for warehousing the captive horses and burros. And what happens if you keep pushing them into warehousing, as the path forward proposed, even with a pipe dream of somehow putting them into off-range pastures that would be lovely, you're going to build up political pressure for slaughter. Now, the welfare groups that really drafted and became part of the unholy coalition with the National Cattlemen's Association thought that they were getting a good deal because they said, well, you're going to back down from slaughter, aren't you? Well, no, actually, it contributed to the cries for slaughter. And so now what we have is the BLM doing it quietly. They have announced a new thrust to get horses and burros out of holding as soon as possible. Get them out like hotcakes. So they're doing group sales now. 25 ahead, of course, if they're older than 10 and they've been passed over in auctions. And we don't even know, because it's very hard to find out, if they're making other deals on that and going beyond. Originally, there was supposed to be, you could, if you want to adopt a group, you can only take 4 at a time for a year. And now quickly they changed that policy. You can take 4 at a time every 6 months. And for all we know, they're pushing out bigger groups. So that's where we are. We're left with a big lobbying and propaganda package that has hoodwinked a lot of congressmen, and big money will keep pouring into it.
Yeah. And 4 at a time per person gets much larger when you start adding in your family members.
Yep. Yeah. I just wanted to follow up on a few things that both Ginger and Charlotte said. And when I thought about the intersection between the Path Forward and Project 2025, I see them as following a kind of falling on a continuum of efforts to eliminate wild horses and burros. And it maybe started before this, but I'm going to start with in 2005, the Burns Amendment that created sales authority and sales without limitation. And along with that, it repealed the prohibition on the commercial sale and slaughter of wild horses and burros that had been covered by law. So then move ahead 12 or 13 years, and what comes along? The Path Forward, which isn't as blatant as the Burns Amendment in that it was billed as a safe and humane management plan, but certainly it presented a real threat to wild horses and horses and burro herds. Now move on to Project 2025, which I think is very closely aligned with the Burns Amendment in that it makes no pretense to have a management plan. Shooting the horses and burros, getting rid of them is what the plan is. But Ginger, I think, mentioned the lobbying and the money. And this was something I thought about after an email exchange with Debbie Coffey. She suggested looking into the Penley connection. And I didn't have a whole lot of time to do this, but I started. And obviously, he wrote the section on the wild horses and burros in Project 2025. But it also looks like he had a hand in the Path Forward. So I follow me along with follow me when I try to explain this, and I hope it makes sense. When he was, I'm going to emphasize, illegally serving as the acting director of the BLM from 2019, I think it was, to 2021, he and Interior Secretary David Bernhardt appointed Beaver County, Utah Commissioner Tammy Pearson to represent the public interest on the BLM Wild Horse and Burro Advisory Board. Now, if you look at the Path Forward, Beaver County, Utah County Commission Office was one of the groups that supported the Path Forward. And if I had enough time, I think I could have gone and through and find a lot of other Penley connections to some of these other groups. So I obviously Penley had a cozy relationship with the Beaver County, Utah commissioners, but who knows, what other groups he was involved with. But, and Ginger said this, one of the things that we have to remember is that there are many, many powerful and well-funded anti-wild horse fanatics. And what came to mind, who came to mind, I don't know if you all remember Forrest Lucas and Dave Duquette. They were from Project Protect the Harvest. Yep. And now I think it's called Western Justice. If we look back, we'll see that they were very involved in all of these extermination plans and that they have huge influence that extends to key positions in the Trump administration, which is really further complicates protecting wild horses and burros. And I think, Ginger, you may remember this. I think David Duquette, he was involved with Sue Wallace, and they were two of the people who started that original slaughter summit. So
exactly.
It would be really interesting to do a map to see all of these different connections. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of powerful and, like I said, well-funded groups and individuals who are supporting a lot of these plans, whether it's the Burns Amendment, Path Forward, or Project 2025. And their goal is to open up those public lands, not only for livestock, but also other extraction industries.
Talk about well-funded. You can't get much richer than Lucas Oil that was very
exactly.
much involved.
Yeah.
And David Duquette, to your point, from Protect the Harvest, he at the Slaughter Summit was the main advocate for eating horse meat. His quote was, "If you've ever eaten a taco on the beach in Mexico, you have eaten horse meat."
Wow. Okay. Well, they Protect the Harvest was also the group that was supporting the what was it? The
Oh, that
spade
movie?
filly
Yes.
fraternity. Yep. And they were
Oh, that, yeah.
taking, yeah, they would take 12 fillies who were bought from the BLM, and I think Leon, what's his name? Pickstead. He was the veterinarian who was doing a lot of the spaying. He would spay these young fillies, and then they would have this rodeo event. And I can't remember, one of the trainers' comments who participated in this rodeo was that the spayed filly was the best gelding he ever rode. And what can you say about that?
You
So,
just want to cry. Yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
I'm just going to ask this question because it fits in with what you were saying. Isabella wants to know, do we have any well-funded and powerful wild horse advocates?
We wish.
I think there's some, but they tend to put their support behind organizations. And I also think they probably keep their identity pretty quiet.
Well, what's the name of that woman who started? She was the widow of, oh gosh.
Madeline Pickens?
Yes,
Yeah.
Madeline Pickens. She was supposedly this wonderful wild horse advocate, and I keep
Yeah.
hearing about her. But what does she do? She created this eco tourism kind of place where you could go see wild horses, but it would cost you $3,000 a night or something like that. It was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
this luxury kind of thing, nothing that we all
Exactly, Ginger. Yeah. And you don't really hear that much about her anymore. She was
know. You
very
don't.
active, and I think
Yeah.
advocates thought that she could play a really significant role in challenging the policies by BLM, but I don't think
Well,
it
yeah,
lasts. Do you remember, Charlotte?
yeah. No, but I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to what can be done in this comment, just because it seems to me that a big theme has to be not only get a better Congress, but enact campaign reform. I see that Australia just passed a law, whereas no individual can give more than 50,000 to a political campaign. What a difference that would make, even
Mhm.
if it was a bigger amount here.
Mhm.
So it's just something I think we have to look outside the box and keep that in the back of our minds when we're
Mhm.
working on these issues.
Good point.
And a lot of times people will tell us you've got to get some celebrities involved. And Willie Nelson was a huge, well, he still is, but he's old and not in it much anymore, but he was a huge wild horse advocate. He adopted many Mustangs himself, but now he lives in Hawaii, and so we don't hear from him much anymore. Robert Redford was a huge wild horse advocate, but he got involved with RTF, so we kind of lost him there. Uh, and other more minor, not A-lister celebrities kind of get in every once in a while, but they don't last long. They just say their piece and go. We would love to get some really big names involved, but it's just so difficult.
So Charlotte, do you want to talk a little bit about, I know, I think we all have a bad habit of just saying wild horses all the time, but I think we forget about the
Yeah.
burros. Um, so what did the path forward mean for burros, and do you have anything to say about that specifically?
Oh, big stuff. Um, well, first of all, and I know Mary's going to talk about this too, because we're very borough oriented. The boroughs, you can just think about them. They're lost, left behind, because a lot of people don't know boroughs, BLM, except in a couple of areas I know about in Arizona, maybe, tends to treat them as little horses,
Yep.
um, and without any knowledge or appreciation of how different they are. And they're let's be frank. uh, burrs are associated with the poor. Horses are associated with royalty. You know, if we go back, and since the time that burros really built this country, the railroads, the mines, all the work they did, you know, when the engines started coming out, they were kind of discarded. And luckily, they're very hardy creatures, so they survived. But just one plank, or the main point really of the path forward, is to slam down populations to almost nothing. The goal for burr populations in all of the West would be 2,900 burrs left. Keep in mind that the 2013 National Academy of Sciences report that BLM commissioned on their wild horse and burr program said no burr should be taken from the range unless you want to mess up the genetic health of the whole population. So it's a disaster for burros, and it's also a disaster because burros, even more than horses, suffer horribly from roundups and capture. They're the most vulnerable to capture stress, to deaths from myopathy, from hyperlipidemia. I can go on. The death rate for burrs in captivity and post Roundup and during Roundup is just huge, something like 12 to 15%. In
Up to
recent
20 in
years.
some cases too, Charlotte.
Absolutely, yeah. Burrs bond for life. We talk about wild horse families, and that's huge, but burrs actually will bond with a partner, can be of the same sex for life. Whenever I've gone to holding facilities, I'm thinking of the one, the Palomino holding facility was visited after the Wild Horse conference in Reno. And I've heard this recently from others in charge of holding facilities. They'll tell you the burrs fly out of there. They fly out of there. And I know that can be true. They're easily adopted. Who are they adopted to? A lot of cases to ranchers, to people who have no idea how burrs can and should be used. I'm talking burr rodeos, burr basketballs, burrs as guardians. And you may found 1 in 50 burrs that actually could work out as a livestock guardian, but that's not their role. And it's actually against what they need. And so, and they use them as training for roping. And when they are worn out and they don't work out for these things, they get rid of them. So the burrs very quickly, you know, go to slaughter abroad. And you've got the Ijayo trade, which worldwide results in 5.5 million to 6 million being slaughtered for their hides. Why? It's for Chinese medicine, it's for Chinese cosmetics. And a lot of the burrs from the US, they go to Mexico, end up in the Ajayo trade. It's a horrible way to die. And Amazon, which I boycott, not only for this reason, but it's a good enough reason, and I hope you'll listen to this. They are the biggest global merchandiser of Ijayo in the world. And a number of groups, including the Brooks Foundation, American Welfare, Animal Welfare Institute, you know, have presented hundreds of thousands of petitions to Amazon to stop that. They would not even meet with them. So I know Mary's going to add more.
No, I agree with everything that you said, Charlotte. And I love that perspective in terms of how horses are thought of versus burros. Horses are considered upper class burros are considered lower class. I just wanted to just add a little bit about the what the NAA, the 2013 NAA report said. At that time, the burro population was at 5,842, and the report stated that the BLM may need to assess whether the AMLs set for burros can sustain a genetically healthy total population. Well, AML for burros, I think it's like around, was it 2,000? You mentioned it, Chris, but it's like 2,900 or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's
The
the
path
AML.
forward makes no acknowledgement of that. The path forward talked about fertility control for burros. There really isn't, and there wasn't at that point. I know HSUS did fund the Platero project, which was supposed to develop and investigate fertility control with PZP. I think it was in Black Mountain, but I did some research, and maybe you all found it, but I didn't see any report or any results from that. And as Charlotte talked about, the path forward talks about helicopter roundups, and I went to a helicopter roundup of the Sinbad burros, and I have to say it was absolutely brutal. When burros are being chased by helicopters, they don't pack up, they separate. So what ended up at this roundup, and I'm sure other roundups, is the wranglers went out and roped the burros. We saw them being flipped over. One burro was being chased by wranglers and fell into a ditch and broke its neck. So helicopter roundups cannot be used. If you're going to do anything, bait trapping seems to be the way to go. The other thing is that they talk about long-term pastures, but there weren't any long-term pastures for burros. And were they going to create them? That was a little bit confusing. And they didn't acknowledge, and I'm not sure if Eric Lundgren's science on burros actually contributing to desert ecologies by building by digging wells. In fact, the whole path forward doesn't talk about any of the advantages that wild horses and burros can play in rangeland ecology. So those were my concerns, and of course, EJOW is just such an ever-present concern. So.
Craig Downer also added that burros only consume half as much as horses and also eat coarser vegetation, but that's also overlooked by the BLM. I do want to I want to say this because we talked about it a few times, and I don't want to assume that people know this, but I believe in 2013, probably before 2013, but the BLM went to the National Academy of Sciences and said, hey, we need help. What is a best path forward we could use for wild horses and burros? So this team of expert scientists came back with a huge report in 2013 called Using Science to Improve the BLM Wild Horse and Burro Program, A Way Forward. So when they came out with a path forward that doesn't use science, they already had this. And it was paid for, I believe it was to the tune of $2 million of our taxpayer dollars. So they've talked about, I just want to make sure that we talk about that a little bit because the National Academy of Sciences has come up a few times in the panel and people may not know that. So it is a really great document. I know I used it a lot when we were fighting really hard for the Theodore Roosevelt horses too. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all.
Well, Chris, yes, as you said, we've mentioned it several times, each of us, to make some of our points and the science that supports it. And it was the BLM who paid for that study, and then they ignored it. They cite parts of it that they like, and then they ignore the rest, which is most of it. So it is a very important report, and we need to keep it at hand. And there's all kinds of other government reports too, from the GAO, Government Accountability Office. There's all kinds